I mean, I don't know if this is true for you when you were like a kid. When I was a kid, Nazis were like, they were kind of all over the place because they were in all the comics that I read.
Yeah.
Rarely a day would go by when I wasn't called Schweinhund by Sam Ibbotson in the playground, and he would pretend to shoot me, and then he would politely die when I gunned him down. I'm guessing kids don't play Nazis in the playground anymore, do they?
Not yet. I think it's coming. I think they're coming back.
I was wondering whether kids these days in the playground, well, maybe they play like, Iraq War 2 or something like that. They role play a different war from about 20 or 30 years ago today. I was just trying to imagine whether 4 or 5 kids would group together and pretend to be Saddam Hussein and his bodyguards, while some other kids pretend to be Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld.
Yeah. I think that suggests a certain level of literacy and competence that youth don't have. I think they're doing Fortnite or Code of Honor or whatever the video games that they're playing.
What sensible 7-year-old doesn't want to role play as Donald Rumsfeld?
I'd love to hear it. He spoke kind of like a 7-year-old at times, so that would be appropriate casting, yeah.
They say satire is dead, that's good.
Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Two Real Cinema Club with me, Andres Lorente.
And me, James Rosica. Every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch 2 films. We watch a brand new film, and then we watch an old film, sometimes a very old film, which has something in common, and then we try and compare the two. And this week, the thing in common is Nazis. Welcome to Nazis. That's what I wrote on my little intro here. Oof.
The Nazis are back.
They are back. They're back at the cinema this week. I remember last week at the Popcorn Counter, you were telling me about intermittent fasting.
Oh, yeah.
And, and for all of my kind of dumb jokes about that last week, I am trying to be a bit more careful about what I put in my body.
Yeah.
But this week's films made me think that I really need to be more careful about what I put in my brain.
Yeah.
There are ideas and images and events that once inserted into your brain never come out. And I had to be kind of conscious about that with this week's films. Sometimes not easy to watch these Nazi pictures, but I think when the alternative is ignoring the Nazis, that's inviting trouble.
Well, and I think the films here are a little difficult to handle because they show the good bits of being a Nazi. There's some of the good life of the Nazis before and during World War, and neither one of these really shows the bad bits of being a Nazi thereafter. And until today, I think we sort of get more perspective on it. But you don't see.
I'm definitely going to call this episode "The Good Bits of Being a Nazi,"
because they don't pay their punishment in either one of these films really. So. But they're both good looks. And have we even mentioned the films? They are The Zone of Interest, which is out now or was out probably the end of 2023 by Jonathan
just
Glazer.
Out it's in the UK here.
Yeah, and Triumph of the Will, the classic from, I think it's 1935 or so.
Yep, 1935. I suppose classic is sort of the right word to use.
Yep.
But also I'm slightly hesitant about praising that film too much.
Yeah.
So, but certainly a well-known, an infamous film, and there are classic elements to it. Yeah. So, Zone of Interest, Triumph of the Will. It's going to be a bundle of laughs. So you get the new one, Zone of Interest. Who's it directed by?
Let's get to it. Jonathan Glazer. Who I know mostly from Sexy Beast, which was a film about 20 years ago.
Yep.
That I quite liked. And then previously, I think he'd done lots of videos for Radiohead and others. There are 2 films that are more recent than Sexy Beast that I have not seen, Birth and Under the Skin. He's got quite a long list of films, but the one that I know is Sexy Beast, and now I know Zone of Interest. Do you know more?
I've seen Under the Skin. I have not seen Birth, which is like kind of a peculiar film about Nicole Kidman being convinced that a 10-year-old boy, is the reincarnation of her husband.
Exactly.
I've read the summary and it all seems kind of a bit weird and uncomfortable. I have seen Under the Skin, which was made 10, 11 years ago. Scarlett Johansson plays an alien who comes to Earth who eats humans. And it's a peculiar film. I've read the book that it's based on, and the film I think is rather more disturbing than the book. In fact, the film Under the Skin has one of the most disturbing, shocking, sad scenes I've ever seen in a film. Which meant that I started watching Zone of Interest with some trepidation. We will talk about that.
Okay.
Zone of Interest is based on a novel as well, isn't it?
By Martin Amis, yeah.
And the Two Real Book Club wins again. I have read the book, so
good.
Later on I'll chuck in a couple of observations about the book and the differences between the book and the film.
All right. Well, Jonathan Glazer based his screenplay on the book, of course. So you'll be able to tell us how much the screenplay resembles the book by Martin Amis.
Yep.
And this film features Christian Friedel and Sandra Hüller.
Hüller, I suppose.
When you get the umlaut over the U, it shortens out. It's Hüller, I think. Hüller.
I think that umlaut, I think it sort of pushes the sound up into your nose, is what I think. So it's kind of, she goes from Hüller to Hüller, I think.
Hüller. Oh, that's nice.
But it's a long time since I studied German at school, so I wouldn't take my word for anything.
I would, because I've never studied German at any school or outside of school, so I'll say Sandra Hüller.
Hüller. Very good. Well, do you want to tell us, I suspect this won't take you very long, do you want to tell us the story of Zone of Interest?
Yes, I'm going to bring you to a spoiler point. Let me guide you towards the spoiler point.
With that, it's every word's going to have an umlaut on it now.
Spoiler point. This film has perhaps the worst opening in film history. I don't know if it was just projected poorly in my theater, but there are several minutes of dark screen with some mumbled music in the background. And it goes on for quite a while. But when it gets going, boy, does this film move well. And it's in German, which is a delight, because normally these films are in English and it just makes no sense whatsoever. So obviously German actors, the film's probably mostly in German. There might be some Polish in there that got by me because, of course, I was reading subtitles. But there's no bizarre English in this otherwise all German and Polish space. So I appreciated that. Opening and closing images. This film starts in paradise and ends in hell. And I would argue that the other one does too. So a large family and the staff, I guess, that works for the family is sort of swimming and picnicking by this pristine body of water. They start walking uphill to their cars and towards their home. The parents from the family are Rudolf and Hedwig Hoss. How, do you say Hedwig or Hedwig?
Oh, I guess good point. It's probably Hedwig, isn't it?
It's probably Hedwig.
And Hearst, I think.
Oh, that's right. Hearst.
I think it's probably Hearst, yeah.
Hedwig has procured a boat for Rudolph's birthday because she has some connections and she knows some people. I think unannounced in the trailers that I saw is the fact that the Hearses, would that be the plural? Hearses.
Yeah, I guess it probably would, you know.
The family lives right next to a certain concentration camp. It's Auschwitz during the Second World War. And despite this cement block wall topped by razor wire that dominates their property, Hedwig has transformed the gardens with the help of some forced labor into a paradise full of flowers, trees, lounging areas, gazebos, pergolas, smoke from the neighboring camp, and intermittent gunfire. This is clearly no ordinary household. And the family, such as the boat, has its pick of plundered clothes objects from the Jewish prisoners in the camp, and even an array of human teeth for their boys to play with. The Huss's lifestyle very viscerally demonstrates how some Germans profited at the expense of Jewish lives and livelihoods. in a really beautiful visual narrative that it sort of constantly works on juxtaposition. I love that about this film. It's this sort of constant battle of your own senses as you're viewing it. You see Hedwig's beautiful flowers while you're hearing the prisoners howling and gunfire in the background. You never really go inside the concentration camp, so it's this sort of monster that you never see that's just absolutely horrifying. Some of the Hearst family members can ignore the horror, and others cannot. And after seeing Rudolph count piles of currencies from all over the world, we learn that he has to be transferred to another camp. But Hedwig will not leave her paradise behind. I would stop there. I think when Rudolph leaves, it's kind of end of first act. He's sort of one of the really the higher ups or the main manager of Auschwitz at the time. And he is asked to go somewhere else. So did you feel like there was a connection between him being too corrupt, like taking even money and for himself, or did you feel like that level of corruption was actually what got him the promotion or the transfer in the first place?
I must say, I felt one interesting thing about this film, which I read, was the way that it was filmed.
Yeah.
So the house where all the action happens, which is the commandant's house in Auschwitz, they built this real actual house, put a bunch of cameras in it, and then just kind of let the actors get on with it. So there's a lot of still cameras which are just following this action, a little bit like almost like you're watching the Big Brother house. That the action goes on within the house, but of that action or of those characters, I felt distinctly disconnected from them entirely. Wow. So when you ask me whether I feel that his level of corruption was normal or exceptional, I felt very, very outside of the characters of this film entirely. I felt very much like I was watching them, at several arms' length.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that this film gives a great deal of psychological insight into the characters themselves. So I don't know is the answer to your question. I felt very distant from the people on screen. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I felt like my first reaction was he was being transferred for sort of committing some sort of crime or just going too far. But then I realized, no, he's just super efficient, and he's presented with these plans for the incineration chambers and all that. And I think he's actually considered like the model prisoner or a concentration camp manager somehow. And he has to go away for a little while just to learn some techniques or whatnot, but then he's planning to go back, and he does get invited to go back. But it's interesting that Hedwig's so enamored with her own lifestyle that she can't keep her family together. She doesn't want to take the children to the next posting, which is, I think, in Poland. So she stays with on her little campus in her little fantasy world. It's amazing that and they live that way right next to the concentration camp, which dominates their backyard, really.
Now, I may be getting the events in the wrong order. That I think it's her mother who comes to stay with them. Is that right? Yeah. And does the mother come after Rudolph leaves or before? I can't remember.
I think she comes before. I think they're there at the same time for a while because there's another family that's visiting. Yeah, and do you want to spoil things? Do you want to ring bells?
We should. I have some ideas about whether this film is spoilable or not.
Yeah.
But I have got a couple of points to make probably before we ring the spoiler bell.
Let's ring the bell for the hell of it. Like I don't. think
go on then.
In 100 episodes, have we not rung the spoiler bell? Yeah.
We've got to ring the bell. Before we ring the bell, I'm going to say one thing.
Yeah.
Which is, and this is probably appropriate to say now because knowing what I know about Jonathan Glazer and having watched Under the Skin, and knowing the topic of this film, I must say I went into this film on high alert.
Okay,
I spent the whole first half of this film in a state of just extreme anxiety because I had so much anticipation for something horrible was going to come up any moment now. And it was only about halfway through the film that I sort of reflected that, wait a second, in the UK, this film has been given a 12A certificate.
Wow.
And that alone made me think, wait a second, okay, although I already appreciate there's an awful lot of horrible stuff going on over that concrete wall.
Yep.
Maybe it's not going to be thrust directly into my face during the film.
Yeah.
So, especially kind of, I would say up until about this point when we're ringing the spoiler bell, I had been on utter tenterhooks for the entire way through. And it was about at this point I realised, you know what? Maybe this film is actually going to be just about bearable. In a way, it is unbearable, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But on its kind of the surface that it presents, it is bearable.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you felt that, because you hadn't seen his previous film. So I wonder whether you maybe didn't have the same trepidation going into the cinema.
I didn't, because I really only knew Sexy Beast, which I thought was, I liked it a lot. I mean, it's that classic, one last heist, one last bank job for retirement or whatever. So the setup wasn't very good, but Ben Kingsley's so good in that film. And
yes, great comedy character.
It's wonderful. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I thought that was a really well done film. And then I just haven't heard really about Jonathan Glazer in decades. So I didn't have any hesitation about it. I went in knowing that it was, on a lot of top lists, so I had high expectations, but I didn't have any anxiety leading into it.
Your blood pressure was a lot lower than mine then, waiting to go into the cinema. Okay, let's ring the bell, shall we? Go on, let's ring the bell. All right, here it is. Oh, yeah. How can we have the podcast without the bell?
That's a nice
Gotta have that
sound. It's familiar, comfortable.
Continue.
I think I'm glad you brought up the mother, because Hedwig's mother arrives. She's impressed with all her daughter has done. But there's this one throwaway line where she might have known someone who is on the other side of that wall, a family that either she cleaned for or they cleaned for her. I forget what it was, but she drops a name. It's someone over there, and it just kind of sticks with you for a moment that they might know someone who's going through horror on the other side of that wall. And she literally wakes up. It's this enlightenment moment. She's sleeping in the backyard. She sees all this smoke coming up from Auschwitz, and it's this awakening, this true emotional and philosophical awakening. And then she can't sleep that night, and then she just disappears. And Hedwig's very angry with her, because I don't think she doesn't announce her departure. She learns it from her one of her maids. And she sort of takes it out on the maid. She admonishes one of the maids by saying, "I could have my husband spread your ashes in," I don't know, I forget what the name of the place was, but presumably some awful place. But, they're living off probably Jewish workers, certainly in the gardens, taking care of these gardens, creating these gardens. And in the household, my impression was that a lot of the workers that were there were Jewish. And, they would see Hedwig and maybe some of Hedwig's friends going through all these clothes that had obviously been stolen from prisoners, and her mother takes off, and it's just it's pretty quick visit, and this transformation in her that shows that she's disgusted, or she's really horrified by what's happening, and she abandons her daughter and her son-in-law just like that.
Yep.
And it mirrors a story around not the youngest child, but one of the young girls in the family who also really can't sleep. Rudolph has to read Hansel and Gretel and stories to her at night, and you get the sense that she also is sort of traumatized by her own lifestyle and her own home, as is the younger boy also. He plays these little fantasy games that you had mentioned in the opening, I guess, and but at the same time, he hears a little boy at one point, I think, getting shot over the wall, over an apple or something like that. So the family is traumatized. The adults don't recognize it because they're living such a good life, and they're providing so magnificently for their family. But there's trauma that is unacknowledged and deeply embedded in the family. And that in itself is a horror as well. It's hard to gain empathy for a Nazi family, but for those kids and the mother-in-law, you certainly saw that they weren't really completely on board with what was happening.
That scene about kids getting shot over an apple is interesting, because there is the film is beautifully shot.
Yes.
The photography is fantastic. I think it's it's understated, and it's the colors are just like a little bit watery. It's that kind of Northern European light.
Yeah,
beautifully framed. Everything is very, very precise. But there are 2 or 3 scenes which completely flip that photography, and they're kind of shot in negative.
Yes.
Which again, I found those scenes very disturbing, and they left me extremely on edge. And they also kind of feel they are on screen at the same time that Hearst is reading the story to his children.
Yeah.
And we see a girl, I think, who turns out to be one of the servant girls collecting apples.
Yes.
And then placing them in the grounds for the workers to find.
Yes.
And then it's only after you've kind of seen those scenes, you get the scene where some people are shot fighting over an apple, and you realise these are probably the apples that she has stolen as a sort of a gift for the people who are going through hell on the other side of the wall. So even her attempt at kindness has just made things even worse for people who are in the worst possible situation.
Exactly.
It has a strange electronic soundtrack as well, those scenes.
Yep.
So the whole thing kind of feels dreamlike and inverted. It's this kind of negative black and white photography, this weird electronic soundtrack, like little scenes from a completely different film that have been spliced into the main body of the film. It's really kind of threw me, those scenes.
I agree with you. I wasn't sure that they were absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell. It looks so different that I wasn't sure if it was actually animation, but I think you're right. It's actually just negative film. And I think it could have been cut. It lends something to it. I don't know if it really lends what Glazer thought it was going to lend. I thought it was like this child's perspective of what was going on, but it was actually telling a little narrative piece that turns this beautiful gesture into like this poisonous apple that she's giving to them, because it gets the forced laborers into trouble and killed in some situations. So, it could have been cut. I don't think it changes the film that much. It's not essential, I guess. And it also it confused me in some ways, in part because you're really not seeing things clearly. Maybe that's the intention. And I wasn't sure who that girl was.
No, I think it's supposed to be disorientating.
Yeah. Well, I too wasn't sure exactly who that character was. She ends up riding her bicycle. She lives in an apartment with a family, and I assumed she was a Jewish girl. And you'd think, well, why aren't all the Jewish people in the area in the concentration camp? And the Husses had a lot of them on their staff. It seemed like the gardeners, I thought, who were weirdly dumping ashes in some cases, and I couldn't tell if that was as a revenge on Hedwig, or if she'd actually ordered them to use ashes from the crematorium in her own garden. It was that's another weird little detail.
Yeah.
So I was a little just uncertain of who the girl was and what she was doing. It finally came out that she was the one who was planting those apples. It takes a while to get to that story. I mean, I think there are maybe 2 or 3 sequences at least of that girl. And then at first, you're not really sure what she's doing. She's sort of pulling something from the earth or taking something from trees. It looks like it's an orchard, but you can't really see because it's this negative imagery. And then you finally see that, she's definitely putting apples down by the shovels and trying to get them some food, clearly, but in some cases anyway, actually getting them into more trouble.
And then where does the film go from there?
There are sort of a few, I don't know, like markers or separations in their marriage that come up when this decision is made where she's going to stay at the house and he's going to go. That's a moment where you see a couple of things where Rudolph is in his office and a woman comes into the office while he's on the telephone, and she sort of starts to let her hair down or whatnot. And the implication there is that he has a lover. I don't know if it's I think it was a local girl. I'm not sure who it was. It was interesting because I don't think it was a prisoner, but he immediately goes down into these bunkers. I think it happens at the camp itself because he's down deep in the bunkers underneath either their house or, I thought, the camp. He washes himself up. He really just drops his trousers and cleans himself up. And he's
Tom Jones
having
style, I think that's called. Yes.
Okay.
Tom Jones, I think, famously, yes, would dip his old man in a bottle of mouthwash. Apparently.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, he dips the old man, and then there was also a tiny implication that obviously she wasn't that enthused about going to another place because she was so selfish. She wanted to be at her gardens. But there's this one point where she has a gardener who's working, and she asks him to stop, and they just share a cigarette in a greenhouse. And I just wasn't sure what was going on there. Was she also taking a lover in her greenhouse? So there's enough rift or tension or disinterest from Hedwig to keep their relationship going where they separate. And then they're living in 2 places. We get a little bit more attention probably on Rudolph, where he's working on concentration camp updates to make them more efficient. So he ends up in another city, and he wires back to her. No, he's actually talking to her on a phone. I'm sorry, kind of updating her on his progress. She seems totally disinterested. It's the middle of the night. Why are you calling me, sort of thing. And he's talking about his work, very detailed. And he's talking about how he was at this big gala and he couldn't stop thinking about how the sort of the logistics of gassing a ballroom-sized space in order to kill people. It's a really just a grim moment. She's not interested. She just says goodnight. And that takes you to the ending where he himself is descending staircase after staircase after this party and after he's called Hedvig. He's coughing and coughing. It's as if he's made himself sick. He's become such a sickened character, coughing and spitting. And then he stops to ponder. And this is a wonderful moment in the film, in my opinion. I couldn't tell if he was imagining his legacy 80 or 90 years down the line, because it cuts to a very modern day, regular cleaning of the museum at Auschwitz, which has sort of preserved the shoes, the clothes, the bags as a way to remember and acknowledge the Holocaust. And then it closes on going away from that image. Then women are vacuuming and cleaning windows and such in the museum. It goes back to the film of Rudolph descending, and then it ends on him going down to hell, basically.
Yeah.
And it's really, really well done. And I don't know if that was in his mind, that he was able to sort of think ahead, like at his own legacy. Probably not, but it definitely shows us the legacy of a character like that, what kind of effect he had on the world.
So I interpreted that final scene as he descends the staircase and he's kind of retching, and you get this sense that maybe he is having a moment of insight into his own evil. And I could be wrong, but I thought he looks directly at us, the audience. I was wondering whether he was able somehow to perceive what we, the future, saw of him. Yeah. So I took that as him. Not so much thinking that breaking the fourth wall rather than thinking of his legacy per se.
Yeah. Yep.
It is an interesting ending. Great summary. I came away from the film, with a lot of emotions. Mm-hmm. But one of the emotions I have, I don't know whether you agree with this or not, I'm going to suggest this. One of the emotions I had at the end of the film was that, this film could have been 10 minutes long and been more or less the same. I kind of felt like this film is a bit more of an art project than a feature film. I felt detached from the characters, and maybe I should feel relieved that I felt largely detached from the characters. And there's kind of something I will mention about that perhaps when we come on to talk about the book. Yeah. But kind of there's not a great deal of narrative story here. It certainly isn't a writer's film, the way that we talked about American Fiction a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. I don't mean that it's not effective or that it's not powerful or that it's not moving, but it feels to me more like an art project than a feature film that I should be going to the Odeon to watch.
I think that's a good take on it. I mean, for me, it's just a beautifully done film. It's very, very competently shot. I agree with you in the sense that I really couldn't place, an act structure beyond that sort of first part, I think. So I agree with you on the narrative front. Like, it's not full of lots of details. It's not a film that you're sort of following a story of any one character. It's much more just a very cold, surgical look at Nazis that honestly I don't think we've really seen that much. Yeah. So for me, I thought it was very effective because it takes sort of the whole concentration camp out in the visual sense. You're never inside that camp. I don't think there's a single shot inside, or if there is, he's on a horse and it's mostly sky above and maybe some smoke above him or something. It's much more about living in such close proximity to unimaginable horror and living a really good and happy life, like just profiting on it. And I don't think we've seen that on like a single family level. And we haven't seen very much in film history, anyway, recent film history, just the pillaging of the prisoners and just living off what they steal from them. It's effective. I think it's a really effective film. I can kind of agree with it's not like plumb full of storylines. It's more just a kind of an examination of this one family how they benefited from the Holocaust.
When I was writing up my notes after watching the film, one of the things that the film really reminded me of, and I don't know whether you know this album, is the album Spirit of Eden by Talk Talk. Have you heard that album?
No.
Which is like, I think it was 1988. I should have looked it up before I started talking about it. It's kind of this album it was like the first sort of post-rock album. So Talk Talk with this kind of British sort of synth pop outfit, and they'd had a bunch of kind of pop hits, and they'd sort of broken through in America, and they kind of done a bunch of catchy songs, and then for their fourth album, they wanted to just do something an awful lot more artsy, and so like the singer Mark Hollis and the producer Tim Freese-Green like just recorded like hours and hours. They had these huge recording sessions, and they recorded choirs and dozens of guest musicians, and they had loads and loads of hours of material. And then got the whole thing and basically turned the fader down on pretty much every track. So there's a kind of huge arrangement here which has been completely pared back and back and back and back to its most minimal form. Yeah. And a lot of the songs are just the voice, or there may be just the voice and then a bit of guitar. And I've listened to this album very, very closely. If you can listen really closely in a quiet environment, you can hear a little bit of the mix in Mark Hollis's headphones, and you can hear that he is singing along to a full instrumental track. But all of that has been cut out in the final mix, and you just have these very, very few elements left. And this feels like the same sort of thing in this film. I've read the book, and so I know that in the book there is a great deal of story, and it's all been pared away. When we talked about Barry Lyndon, there was a story then about Kubrick basically taking pages of Thackeray's novel, ripping them out of the book and gluing them onto sheets of A4 and saying, well, here's today's pages. Here's the script. And I think you could sort of almost do the same thing with Zone of Interest, but you would only need about 3 pages. Because in the book, you would rip out the pages that talks about the sounds coming over the wall.
Yep.
That notion that Hearst has about gassing a whole party of dignitaries, that is a passing moment in the book, so that's another page that you would rip out. And kind of Hearst going to this bigwig meeting in Berlin where they talk about what are they going to do with all these new Jews that they're going to take from Hungary. That's another page from the book, and that's about it. That's like those are the 3 elements that have been taken out of the book and turned into the film, and that's about it. It's a very kind of minimal, pared back interpretation of a considerably busier book.
Yeah, I agree. And it's another thing is it intentionally pares back that everything that happens inside that camp, actually.
Yes.
So it's a film about seeing horror and those not seeing horror for their own gain, I think. Like we have to sort of imagine it. A lot of the horror that we have to take out of that camp is sensory stuff. It's sounds, it's seeing smoke, it's seeing all these shovels, these big, I don't know, they're building a railway nearby or something like that, probably to take trains in and out of the camp. And it's forced labor doing that shovelful by shovelful. So you sort of have to, the viewer has to do a little bit of the imagining, which I think is actually really effective, because that's, I think in like other Holocaust films, everything in the camp is considered cinematic. That's the imagery you want to show. And it's I think it's really interesting to step back and say, no, we're going to show the wall. We're going to show the razor wire. We're going to show the smoke. We're going to play with your ears and put all these horrible sounds in your ears, but we're not going to show you any prisoners inside the camp. You do see some working on the grounds and working in the house, but you don't see any inside the camp. And I think that's a massive paring down when you think about it. And I think it's effective.
Yeah,
it's like never seeing. Effective. I think it's like never seeing the shark in Jaws to a certain extent, right? Like
yes, that's just what it's like. Yes,
and you in Jaws, sadly, you eventually do see the shark. And it looks okay, but in this film, you never see the shark, and that's effective, I think.
Yeah, that's what makes it so very terrifying, isn't it? And it also has this great advantage that it means the film can function as a metaphor beyond its kind of Holocaust story. So it becomes, like a broader story just about people's ability to ignore, the horror that's behind the wall, isn't it? And whether you take it as a metaphor about sort of climate change and people happily tootling about their lives while climate change happens because it's mostly going to affect poor people in another country, or there's war in Ukraine and there is war in the Middle East, and yet we are still tootling about and living our lives and able to kind of blot out that horror which is happening in another part of the world. It lends itself to that interpretation. As wide, you can go as wide as you like, and it works.
Do you have any other thoughts on the book comparison to the film?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you a bit more about the book. So I did say, this is like Martin Amis's second novel about the Holocaust, at least, I think, after Time's Arrow. He may have written other stuff about the Holocaust as well. And there are a lot of characters in the book, and there's three major points of view. So there is Doll, who is the Hearst character in the film, he is the commandant of Auschwitz. Then there is Thompson, who is a Nazi officer who is intent on seducing Doll's wife. And then there is Schmull, who is a prisoner worker. He's what do they call them? It's a Sonderkommando. And the whole trajectory of the book is inclined towards this one violent act that Doll suspects that his wife Hannah is having an affair, and so he spends a lot of time trying to persuade and trying to force Schmull, the prisoner worker, into a scenario where he will murder the wife Hannah for him.
Wow.
But there's this kind of weird juxtaposition, because when people are being killed on an industrial scale on the other side of a wall there, then it becomes difficult to lend too much dramatic weight to a single act of violence when there's continuous violence happening just the other side of the building. So it's tricky from that point of view. You are asking yourself, am I paying attention to the right elements of the story here? It's tremendously well written. Martin Amis certainly knows how to use a dictionary. And every chapter has kind of 3 points of view. So every chapter has a section from Thompson, a section from Doll, who is who's amusingly incompetent. He's a real kind of comedy character. He's just a total idiot. And then a section from Schmull's point of view. So they each get a POV in each chapter. And there are a lot of episodes. A lot happens. And 95% of all that stuff is ejected for the film. And it may well be that when the book came out, Jonathan Glazer optioned it and thought, well, there's lots of great material in here. And a little bit like the recording of Spirit of Eden, he just pared and pared and pared and pared away until getting down to the absolute kind of nexus, the crux of what the story was, and realized that all the other stuff wasn't necessary. That actually the most interesting story is the banality of evil while hell happens on the other side of a wall. So it's good, and a lot happens, and there's some amusing characters. And interestingly, Hitler is mentioned throughout the book, but never ever by name. And Martin Amis writes this little afterword at the end of the book where he says, "This is the first time I'm going to actually mention Hitler by name." And he quotes this thing from Primo Levi when he writes this afterward, where he kind of says that Levi writes that Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels could not be understood. They are outside human understanding. To understand them would be to legitimize them or to contain their ideas. That somehow understanding Nazism is impossible. So do not try. I think that's kind of part of the message of the book, or part of the conclusion he comes to at the end. So, so the book is good. It's interesting. I enjoyed it, but only 3 pages appear on screen. But Jonathan Glazer has probably chosen the right 3 pages.
Yeah.
I hesitate to ask because I wonder whether this film may be cliche-proof. But I've got the theme song lined up, so I'm going to have to call the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
my question to you is, well, is this film cliche-proof?
I think it is. The cliches have sort of become a Nazi. I'm sorry, Nazis have sort of become a cliche, I should say.
I guess, yes.
They're not really a cliche in this film, so I think it is kind of cliche-proof, honestly. Yeah, I didn't write anything down, so.
I made a couple of notes.
Okay, good, good.
I kind of said, well, there are cliches insofar as we have the cliche of German efficiency. And we have the cliche of the banality of evil, but is that a theme? Is that a cliche? I mean, that's what's at the very core of the story of the film. The banality of evil is the point of the film. I wrote down one little quote here in the darkness where there's some, I guess, engineers who turn up with a new design for ovens for the concentration camp. And they have a little bit of chit chat before they start the sales pitch for their new ovens. And one of them says, we travelled by Prague because it is 56 minutes faster. And I guess that is a kind of a cliche of someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, isn't it? I suppose it's paring things down to these individual little numbers. But otherwise, I mean, I agree with you. I think this film, when it does have cliches, it has cliches for a reason, and the cliches are an important part of the story that it's trying to tell. Well, let's have a break. I've got to have a break. I can only watch Nazis for so long. I need to get some fresh air. We'll have a break and then we'll come back and we will talk about, more Nazis. Triumph of the Will, 1935. You'll be surprised to hear that sponsors weren't rushing to associate themselves with the Nazis on tonight's podcast. So instead, we want to tell you about our own new venture. After the success of the Dune 2 novelty popcorn bucket, shaped like a sandworm, we thought that we'd get in on that market by launching Two Real Cinema Club Popcorn Counter Popcorn. Fresh and hot, served direct from the popcorn counter, featuring flavours based on films that we've been screening. Like the Boy and the Heron flavour, which tastes a bit like bird droppings. We have the Holdovers flavour, which tastes of stale beer and cold Christmas roast. Or Blackberry flavour, which tastes of smartphone packaging and ozone. Alternatively, you can buy Past Lives flavoured popcorn, which tastes of vague regret and unrequited love. We have Mission Impossible flavour, which tastes of Tom Cruise's manly sweat, and my least favourite, the Poor Things flavoured popcorn, which tastes like the dirty sheets dragged off the floor of a dingy Paris hotel room. TRCC Popcorn Counter Popcorn. Don't just watch a film, consume it. And we are back. And I wrote a little sentence. I was thinking, I'll bring us back from the break with this. So, following a film about some of the most evil people who ever lived, we now have a film starring some of the most evil people who ever lived. We have watched Triumph of the Will from 1935. Directed by Leni Riefenstahl, written by Leni Riefenstahl, and starring a whole bunch of genuine, real-life Nazis. Now, I think this is probably the right film to compare with Zone of Interest, but I wasn't the one who chose it. You chose it. Tell me, what made you choose Triumph of the Will for our part 2?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
I'm glad I did in hindsight, but I don't know exactly why I did. I didn't know too much about Zone of Interest, honestly. I'd seen the trailers and heard about it. And, as I said earlier, in the trailer, you have no idea that they're living right next to a concentration camp. So that was new to me. I think I wanted to have a couple different views of Nazis in World War II, and I had seen Triumph of the Will once. I'm not sure if I saw the whole film. Yeah, I've seen it once before. It was being taught in a class at the college in the town where I grew up, so I just would sneak over there sometimes and sit in on their classes and their screenings. So they were showing it, and I watched it there. So I remembered it.
I didn't know you grew up in Nuremberg.
No, Brunswick. It's called Brunswick, but it's probably a German city originally. Brunswick.
Maybe.
Yeah. So there were a lot of Germans and Austrians for their small town in Maine, by the way. Wow.
Strokes chin slowly.
Yeah, you can't see that on the pod, but yeah. But I also think there's some growing fascism in this country, and I think around the world a little bit right now. And I think, obviously there's some zeitgeist there. I don't know when Jonathan Glazer started adapting this and filming it, but it's perfectly timed, I think. Do you have a lot of neo-Nazis in England at the moment, or are you seeing a rise of fascism? Or?
Our ruling party, the Conservative Party, seems to be gradually sidestepping to the right every year. Yeah. But it's looking fairly likely that we may vote them out in the general election this autumn. So we may be able to keep the right-wingers at bay for a little bit longer in the UK. I think we in this country are watching with alarm, though, as the right-wing seems to be emerging in other countries. Yeah. Certainly, The Guardian was running a story a couple of weeks ago saying that 2024 is going to be going to host some of the most important elections for a very long time. Yeah. Because here in the UK, in the US, and around the world, this may be a turning point for right-wing politics. So we're all watching in trepidation. Shall I tell you a little bit about Triumph of the Will and see whether maybe the fascists of the 1930s can teach us a little bit about the fascists of the 21st century?
Yes, please, bring them on.
So I'd never seen this film, so I had to do a little bit of reading about it after I watched it. So Leni Riefenstahl, she was a German actor at the time. And so in 1932, she had directed her own film called The Blue Light, Die Blaue Licht, something like that. And it so impressed Hitler that he asked her to make a film about the 1933 Nazi rally. So she made a film about that rally, which is called The Victory of Faith. And this film kind of, it did fine, but then it very quickly became a big embarrassment to the Nazis because it prominently featured this stormtrooper leader called Ernst Röhm, who was executed in the Night of the Long Lives. So Hitler wanted to expunge Röhm from the entirety of German history, which meant that Riefenstahl had to make another film. So he asked her then to make another film the following year, and she particularly didn't want to do it. She tried to get somebody else to do it, a director called Walter Ruttmann, but Hitler didn't like Ruttmann, didn't like his approach. Hitler sacked him, basically left Riefenstahl to make another film. So she made basically a remake of The Victory of Faith called The Triumph of the Will. So it's a lot like the earlier the film. She used many of the same ideas, many of the same visuals, the same score was reused. I think the difference is that she had more time to prepare this time around. And Hitler was better understanding the value of good propaganda. So he and Albert Speer, who was kind of Hitler's architect, they staged the rallies in the film with one eye on how it would look on screen. There's a whole bunch of speeches in this film, and apparently they didn't come out when Riefenstahl filmed them. So she refilmed them in a studio in close-up. Pits were dug so that she could get her camera low enough to always be looking up at the Führer. In total, she shot about 61 hours of footage, including some impressive aeroplane shots, some massive crowd scenes. It was all edited down to form this 2-hour film, Triumph of the Will. When you saw it as part of your course, what did they teach you about it back then?
Oh, I didn't. I was a freeloader. I just would sit in and go to the screenings at night for some of these classes. It's considered, like a masterful documentary. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult film, and it's an ugly, ugly subject. Her work is amazing, though. It's a very impressive documentary. So I think that's definitely the angle that they take, and it's also, it's a massive propaganda piece. So I think on the filmmaking of the documentary and how a documentary can be used, and obviously Hitler's hands are all over this thing. It's very, very competently done. It's obviously spreading a lot of terrible propaganda and showing the worst part of Germany at a certain point in its history. But as a film, there's some beautiful shots. There's some very technically impressive shots. And the access to the characters is very intimate. I mean, you're right behind Hitler as he's on his motorcades. You're getting insights into the characters very closely at these speeches that you're mentioning, and the sound is really good for the 1930s. So I'm not surprised that they were redone in studios, because the sound is actually, it's very clear, it's very audible. I mean, this is probably a remastered version that you're watching. I watched it on Apple TV, so I think it's a 2015 version. So it's in great shape. So they're looking at it more as film than as a political statement, but obviously acknowledging that it's a massive propaganda campaign.
I've got the music lined up, so let me tell you what the story is. Although it won't take very long, and then maybe we'll kind of go through some thoughts about the film, its making and its impact. Okay, so let me tell you the story though. So, Triumph of the Will, made in 1935, and the story is Nazis. And that's basically it. I finished my synopsis there, but then I thought twice. I thought, okay, I probably ought to treat it a little bit more sensibly. So the film is a documentary record of the Nazi Party Congress of 1934. And as you say, it's beautifully filmed, beautifully edited, masterfully put together. It's an outstanding propaganda film. It's a visual record of a huge Nazi rally, and it's full not just of speeches and marches and crowds, but also it's like an I Spy book of the Nazi leadership. So Himmler, is on screen, Goering, Hess, they're all there. The film supposedly shows 4 days of the Congress, so we start by seeing Hitler fly in. We get some aerial shots from supposedly his actual plane. He is cheered by crowds lining the roads. We see speeches from a whole bunch of Nazi dignitaries. There's a parade of the Labour Service, all these guys who are carrying spades. There is a Nazi youth rally. And then finally, and this is probably like the most famous footage from the film, there is a huge rally with an amassed 150,000 stormtroopers and SS standing at attention, carrying flags. Oof. And then the film ends with a few more brief speeches, and it ends with Hess basically in tears telling the crowd, Hitler is Germany, Germany is Hitler. It's like a 2-hour advert for the Nazis. And not just an advert. Basically, if you have ever seen Nazis, be they in Indiana Jones or the Guns of Navarone or whatever, this film is the Nazis. Every image that we have seen of Nazis on screen, well, this is the source that they drew from. We have remarkable imagery of the Nazis that shows us, well, this is exactly what they look like, and this is how they rolled. So as a historical document, well, this is fascinating. I think it's probably a bit too long. Yeah. And there's only so much jackbooted marching that you can watch before you feel, okay, I get the message now. Yeah. But you do get to the end of the film thinking, this is an impressive show. They knew how to put on a show. Yeah. And, there's a lot of, quite impressive stagecraft going on here. And Hitler and the Nazis understood the value of propaganda. Yeah. And that propaganda playbook, that Nazi playbook, has been read and absorbed by a lot of Nazis that we have seen since. I mean, it's all that. It's uniforms, iconography, easy to draw symbols, boots, logos, and branding, uniforms, torches. You get all of that, and they knew that those icons drill their way into people's heads. Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned stagecraft, because it all is very, very staged. So as impressive as it may be, just in sheer numbers, it's impressive in sort of the only word I could think of was choreography and the organization of all these events, because it really is supposed to be was it a 5 or 6 day sort of event, this rally at Nuremberg. And the numbers are incredible, and actually just being able to stage an event like that in itself is pretty incredible. So that, it sort of does sickly demonstrate the power of the Nazi movement, that they could have all those campers in there, feed them all, and choreograph the sort of the marching scenes and the assemblies and the ceremony events. It's all really, really, really well choreographed. So it does show the power of the Nazis, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. I do wonder a little bit about the audience. Like, where did this play? Was it just to get Germans excited, or was this ever exported to other countries to scare the hell out of countries, or like serve a warning? Because this is 3-4 years before sort of the commencement of World War II. But it sort of serves notice, I guess, to the whole world. But I wonder if it had an international release, or who was the audience? Was it just for Germans, or was it supposed to be for the whole world?
Yeah, that is a good point, isn't it? See, I think it probably was aimed at the whole world. You know that saying that when people tell you who they are, you should listen.
Yeah.
This film is kind of the Nazis telling the world who they are.
Yes.
And who they are is not warm and cozy.
No.
They're not really trying to seem appealing. It's fire and brimstone. It's indignation and fury and the smiting fist. I mean, I'm not sure that many people would have watched this film and thought, yeah, I want to join those guys. They seem to be having a blast.
Precisely.
But I think a lot of people would have watched that film coming away thinking, well, I don't want to oppose them.
Yep.
They look too frightening. I'm just going to keep my head down. And it turns out, like the Rudyard Kipling poem, keeping your head down, if you can persuade people to keep their head down, that's all that's required for evil to triumph.
I mentioned this bizarre juxtaposition of like the happy campers. It's this film sort of at least tries to paint this picture of it's good to be a Nazi moment in German history, and yet at the same time, what you just mentioned, they are so mirthless. This is a bunch of very sad-looking people, or just repressed people somehow. It's very, very strange. But that's in there, as well as all these other just creepy moments as well. There's so much creepy stuff. The blood ceremony, the blood banner ceremony is really creepy, where Hitler's grabbing the new flag and touching the old flags with it and shaking these hands, and it's just awful. Or the nighttime serenade for Hitler. There are just a lot of these moments that are really very real, and I think they maybe Eisenstahl wanted to capture some of that evil somehow, but I wonder about her position in all this, because it's just creepy in many ways. So I think it's, instead of celebrating them or trying to gloss them over in their propaganda, they're actually just showing how creepy they are. So I love your statement about listening to people when they tell you who they are, because this film definitely tells you who the Nazis are.
You and I, we try to make jokes on this podcast, and I know we talked about earlier about how, oh my God, we have to make gags about the Nazis now. But I think, I think maybe we do. I think that is the best response. We were saying earlier that you should meet evil with ridicule.
Yeah,
I was reading even during the Second World War. So Brits recut parts of Triumph of the Will to the song "Doing the Lambeth Walk." So this was shown in British cinemas. They would show little clips from this film, but they would run the film backwards and forwards, making Hitler and the troops dance to the music.
Oh, wow.
It was like the 1943 version of Deep Fakes. And there was like an American response to Triumph of the Will made by Frank Capra. I think there were 7 episodes in a series called Why We Fight. And Capra used some Triumph of the Will footage in Why We Fight.
Wow. Yeah.
Apparently he called Riefenstahl's film a psychological weapon aimed at destroying the will to resist. And that's, that kind of is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
These guys are scary. I'm not sure you look like you want to join them, but I don't fancy meeting any of them in a dark alley. You watch this film with a modern pair of eyes, and you know what you think? You think, well, that's a cult.
Yeah.
Because clearly it is.
For sure.
Did people in 1935 see the same thing? It must surely have looked dystopian even then.
It's definitely, very, very cultish. Very, very cultish. And dangerously so, for sure. I think there is this one shot that I want to talk about because it's I call it the money shot. Every film is sort of a money shot.
Yeah.
I think it occurs right at the midpoint, and I think it sort of has this sort of surrealist origination to it. So right about the midpoint of the film, and three men, I think it's Hitler, Hess, and maybe Goebbels, are walking across this stadium. They're walking through columns of just absolutely still thousands of people just standing at attention, and they're walking over towards, there's sort of this eternal flame for von Hindenburg, who had died recently, I think, so they were trying to honor him.
Yeah.
But it's this slow walk, and it looks like a Salvador Dali painting or something like that, because it can't be real. And sadly it is real. But it's this moment of sort of dehumanization of the many, because there are all these people that are just little specks, and then this aggrandizement of a few people. And it happens right at the center of the film, and you watch them walk across the stadium, they pay their respects, they walk back across. It's this long, deliberate sequence, and it's sort of the very heart of the film. And I think that shows you the cultishness of it. Like, all these thousands of people can stand there still to watch these three guys just cross a field to honor one of their fallen and then come back again. It shows the power of, I think it shows the power of the film, but it also shows the power of the cult.
Yeah, I would love to know whether they had to do multiple takes. Apparently there were a lot of cameras, which is part of the reason why there is so much footage. But it seems so incredibly well choreographed that I did find myself asking, God, did they really get all this in one take?
Yeah.
Did Hitler not have to go back and walk again? And maybe kind of just repeat a few of these scenes, because they have been they've come out very, very effectively, haven't they?
Yeah. The coverage is amazing, and some of the techniques, I think there's some technology that she was probably developing and she had a chance to use. So I think it in terms of like furthering the craft of filmmaking, I think a lot of things were probably learned on this film. And it also sort of contributes to a lot of that, that impressionistic stuff that came out of Germany right around that same time, a little before, but that captures it as well. I've noticed at one point there's a flagpole behind the sort of podium where the speakers are that had a camera going up
yeah, I saw
down.
that too.
Did you see that? Yeah, and I was amazed by that. And that was exactly how you got a lot of these other shots. I think there's just tons of coverage. I think you're right. There are cameras everywhere shooting everything. I think Hitler would probably be happy to replay something or redo something if it didn't come out well. But I suspect a lot of it was done just on one take.
I think we have a moral duty to defeat evil with ridicule. So I did note down a few of the things that I spotted in the film. And the first one, which really occurred to me, was that these Nazis, the guys making the speeches, they're very sweaty, aren't they?
Yes, it's a sweaty bunch.
There is an awful lot of sweating. It's interesting that they've all copied Hitler's mannerisms and speech patterns, haven't they? They all talk the same. They have this kind of this sort of shouty staccato style. They all shout. Just like the Führer. Yeah. And the other thing I really noticed is what's with the salutes? Like all the people like in the crowd, all the people who are lining the street to see Hitler, they've all got this kind of, they've raised their arm at 30 degrees, and everyone does that except Hitler. Yeah, he does this really pathetic thing. I was trying to think, what are you doing? He looks like a child who's trying to show you where he's grazed his elbow.
That's right.
He's just constantly showing, look at my elbow. Look, I can't believe that you can lead 150,000 people, but you can't stick your hand in the air properly. Yeah. I did not understand that at all. I got to the end of the film basically, and I felt like the whole ceremony had the feel of like it was like an enormous version of the home movie of a gang of overconfident kids who had so successfully bullied the other children in the playground that they had forced their mothers to go out and buy them uniforms to show that they were on the same gang. And it's like they were kind of thinking, what should we call our gang? We've got to have a good name for our gang. Adolf. What's the opposite of nice kids? Or the opposite of nice kids, Nazi kids. With the Nazis. That's what it is. It's like they couldn't even pronounce nasty properly. Yeah. It's just, they really seem like, to me, like big kids, big nasty kids. Yeah.
Shills for the clothing industry. They just wanted to sell uniforms.
God, could you imagine getting the contract for those jackboots?
Yeah. A lot of different kits, too.
That's 300,000 jackboots on a single invoice.
I got to say, my arm was tired just watching all the saluting. I felt like, oh my God, I can't do that for 5 seconds. They're doing it again and again. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Well, there's that sort of group mentality that becomes ridiculous. And, obviously they were trying to promote it as a cool thing or as the right thing. And in truth, you really see how brainwashed everyone was and how sad it really is ultimately.
Yeah. Yep. Nazis, to hell with them. I'm glad we have this document.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to watch. It's useful, I think, to see how crappy evil can be.
Yeah.
It's impressive and yet unimpressive at the same time. I don't know. To hell with them. To hell with them.
Yeah, to hell with them for sure. But I think that is the wonderful thing about this film is that it's a document. It's a very accurate, very real document of how terrible they were and how terrible that movement was. And it's on film and it's everywhere. So it should serve as a real warning shot to us all, I think.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. A warning shot. We have a very, very difficult task now because I'm going to ask you to play my favorite game. I'm going to ask you to play, having watched like literally 4 hours of Nazis, I'm going to ask you to play Who Am I?
Who am I?
Okay. I've never done this before, but in Zone of Interest, I think something that might go overlooked is the animal training.
Oh,
there's this one very nice dog that I think I am that dog who kept very often getting locked out of rooms and such, but he performs for the camera beautifully. Like the continuity of the movements and the animals is something I've never seen before. So there are a couple of scenes where in the coverage the dog doesn't miss a beat. He jumps over this hedge at one point, and he starts jumping from one angle, and Glazer goes to another angle when he finishes the jump over this bit of hedge or something. And it's all perfect. And the horse, Rudolph's horse, does this wonderful neck work in a darkened scene where Rudolph's down there. I don't know if he's saying goodbye to his horse at that point, but he obviously loves his horse more than his wife and family. And the horse, the same thing. And I'll talk about the coverage of Glazer a little bit later when we synthesize, I think. But it's complicated, and the animals really did very, very well. So I'm copping out here. I'm the animals, more so the dog, in Zone of Interest.
That was a lovely dog. You are right.
I'm glad I got to go first.
I have written, under Who Am I, I've written no.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not anyone in these films. Yeah. Yes, in a way, I am sort of like someone in Zone of Interest insofar as I too am standing by playing in the garden as the environment collapses and wars continue. So are you, in a way, that is me, and that is sort of all of us in the cinema?
Yeah.
Because that's sort of the point of the film, I think.
Yeah.
And look at me now. I am sitting in a comfortable room doing a podcast rather than protesting outside the Houses of Parliament. So in that case, I am kind of committing that same sin in a way. I'm happy to say I do not feel anything like the people in Triumph of the Will. I mean, there's an early scene in the Triumph of the Will of you can see that the troops, they're not even Hitler Youth, they're just kind of young troops, but they're just kind of boys, just kind of fooling around, and you kind of think, they don't look evil, and yet the evil was to send these boys, to die for the sake of evil. I'm afraid my response I wrote was no. I think no, and I'm going to stick to it. I should have been a dog. A dog is a good choice.
Dog is good. Well, it's the only choice. It's either no or dog.
Okay, well let's. So you've alluded to it. Let's do the synthesis then. Let's bring the two films together, and they do have a lot in common. They certainly belong together. Let's do this. So I wrote here, for both of these films, the story is something that happens off screen. I think that is especially what ties these two films together. I mean, it is the theme of Zone of Interest. That is the whole point. But I think the same is true of Triumph of the Will, insofar as that film feels like the definition of dramatic irony, because we, the viewer, know something that all the people on the screen do not know. Mm-hmm. We know how that whole Nazi thing panned out in 1945. We watch the film and we are kind of looking for the clues to that defeat. But someone who saw the film at the time, someone who saw the film in 1935, would not have seen the big picture in the way that we see it today. Someone in 1935 may have taken away a very different idea from watching Triumph of the Will. We have the advantage in 2024 of being able to see the things that are not presented to us on screen. Although I would argue that a perceptive eye, and I hope maybe a perceptive eye in 1935, Frank Capra in 1935, would spot those seeds of downfall even in this triumphant documentary.
Yeah, and I had a hard time wording this exactly, but I think they're both beautiful films. It's hard to say that about the Triumph of the Will, but it's a beautifully shot film. There's great filmmaking, I guess, is
there is craft.
One of the themes. There's a lot of craft in both, and I don't know if this wording works for you, but this is what I ended up with. I said, Triumph is an ugly thing of beauty because it shows you ugliness, and she does a beautiful job of filming. Basically, it's great photography, we could say. And The Zone is a beautiful thing of ugly. I think it really is a beautiful looking film of ugly stuff. I'm not sure that there's much difference there, if that helps anyone understand these films, but that's kind of what I stumbled upon.
I think that is pretty profound.
We're dealing with some really ugly things, but how you handle it as a propagandist is one way, and how you handle it as a narrative filmmaker is something different. So I think both filmmakers are doing really great work here. I mean, I don't know a lot of Jonathan Glazer's work, but having seen Sexy Beast many years ago, I think he's made huge progress in this film 20 years later. And I don't know Leni Riefenstahl's film very much at all, or her work very much at all. So, but they are great films. And I think the thing I like about Zone of Interest is how it really wrestles with an uncomfortable past, and it does it very thoughtfully, thoroughly, and artfully. And I kind of credit the Germans with that too. I know obviously Glazer's an English filmmaker, but the Germans they've confronted the Holocaust, they've confronted their past, and I think they've made a lot of great changes culturally and socially as a result. I think Americans, we haven't done the same thing. We haven't had this kind of film that we need for slavery. So we haven't really confronted it straight on. And Steve McQueen sort of did it for us in 12 Years a Slave, but he's English, so it's odd that we haven't had and maybe Glazer as an English filmmaker can help the Germans make that next step in terms of seeing their past. But there's that last scene next to last scene sort of in Zone of Interest, which shows about just not sanitizing. You're cleaning up the future in the sense that you're acknowledging it and you're working with it and trying to move on, but at the same time you're not sanitizing it. You're not absolutely eliminating all of the germs and the bacteria that are left behind by our predecessors. So I think one film sort of promotes the what is eventually going to be sanitized or cleaned up, and the other film sort of just puts a little punctuation on it by like bringing it up again, showing you in a new context, in a new age, and then again sort of trying to move on, but not without refusing to acknowledge the past.
I guess what's that kind of famous quote that he who does not acknowledge the past is destined to repeat it.
Yes. Yeah, there are a couple of weird details that I was going to ask you about. The first one is Rudolf Hess features prominently in Triumph of the Will, and then the character in Zone of Interest is Rudolf Hoss. But it sounds like he doesn't have the same name in the book. Is that correct? Or?
Yes. Well, interestingly, I think Rudolf Hoss or Hess was a real person. He was the real commandant at the real Auschwitz. Whereas I think it's Heinrich Doll is the character in the book Zone of Interest, who is not a real person. So I think he's given a name which looks a little bit like Hearst.
Okay.
But it is not the same. And so I think the suggestion is that Martin Amis doesn't want to presume that the commandant of Auschwitz tried to kill another officer and tried to kill his own wife because she was unfaithful.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this may not be a particularly inaccurate portrayal of the real life of the real Hearst.
Yeah, the real Hearst. There were also these two moments of sort of unfortunate product placement that I caught onto. In Triumph of the Will, Hitler's plane is a Lufthansa. It lands. You can see right there. It's like, and that was probably they were happy about supporting the Nazis at that time. In Zone of Interest, Siemens comes up at one point. Like Siemens is going to be on board for some. I think it's part of the incineration processes or something like that. It struck me as being very honest. I mean, in a film of 2024 to acknowledge the fact that Siemens had some part in the Holocaust was very. I thought again, it just really kind of focuses on that honesty and that unwillingness to just sanitize these corporations today and just overlooking their pasts. The last thing I wanted to mention was just, and you were talking about how in the book you get everything from three different perspectives.
Right,
and it just rang this bell in my head because I was really watching the direction of Zone of Interest because Glazer was constantly sort of changing angles. He shot things sort of like the way Riefenstahl does in Triumph of the Will. There's just a lot of coverage, a lot of different angles, and he's showing a lot of scenes through multiple perspectives. So you sort of get a feel of where the servants are in a scene, where the family is in a scene, where the officers are. So he actually does a pretty good job of bringing sort of all these lens angles to the scenes. And as you said, maybe he doesn't really penetrate the inner psychology of the family members, but he's definitely showing you things from a number of different angles, so you get a full picture of it. And I think that was very intentional, and it sort of reminded me of that when you mentioned the coverage in the literature from three different characters' perspectives.
Right. Yeah. We've talked in the past about the challenges of adaptation. I think this is a terrific adaptation, insofar as it follows one of our favourite rules, which is throw away as much as you possibly can, and yet it does retain, like not just a few character and plot details, but also the spirit and the themes of the book and the whole point of the exercise. So I think it's a great adaptation. Well done. Yeah. Do you think it'll do well at the Oscars? Or is it just a little bit too hard going?
Yeah, it should. It might be hard given the subject matter, but I don't know what it's up for in terms of nominations, but it needs to be recognized. I think it's a really, really well-made film. And we've had a great run, in my mind, in the last month, right up until about the holidays, with The Holdovers and American Fiction and is it Pretty Things? And then,
Poor Things.
Poor Things, and then Zone of Interest. I mean, I've actually wanted to watch most of these films. And Triumph of the Will is ugly. It's difficult. As you said, it's long, but wow, it's powerful for reasons both good and bad. So I think we've had some great films lately.
I think the reason you wanted to watch those films is because you're the one who's chosen those films. That's why they've been good. Just wait till it gets back to my turn again, and you'll be watching some crap. Don't worry, I promise.
Bring it on. Bring on the crap.
Okay, we've just got time to talk about what has also been playing at this theatre. And just like every week, I can't remember who goes first. Do you want to go first?
You do.
Shall I go first?
Yes.
I'll go first. Which is we have still got a couple of weeks to go on our Apple TV free trial, so we are squeezing the absolute maximum out of it. So this week we have watched, in fairly quick succession, Silo, a 10-episode kind of science fiction dystopian drama with Rebecca Ferguson, Tim Robbins, great cast. predictably, this is so boring, but I have read the book that it is based on. So it was good fun to watch that. My daughter really likes dystopian fiction. I'm not entirely sure why or what that says about her psychology, but it's completely up her street. And it's rare for us to all sit down, and all of us to want to sit down and watch the next episode, and then the next episode, and then the next episode. And we were all kind of in it. And it tells a fairly skillfully told story about some unspecified future nugget of humanity who are living in an underground silo and know very little about the outside world. And yet, unsurprisingly, there is a lot of paranoia, and some people want to escape the silo, and some people want to keep people inside the silo. The best summary I read was someone said it's like a submarine drama, but writ large. And that's just what it is. It's people kind of underground, trapped, and wondering what they can see through the periscope. A lot of fun, and incredibly, unbelievably, ended with a fairly satisfying final episode, which answered a few questions and posed a few other questions. It's very rare that people manage to hit the ending, and get it right. And Silo really does. Very good ending.
Wow.
So I would recommend it. It's good.
Oh,
good. We've got to wait another couple of years for season 2 now. What have you watched?
Does Silo include an actor by the name of David Oyelowo?
I think it does, yes. Although I think his character is killed off fairly early in the series. Spoilers, sorry, but yes.
I saw him in a short film just today because I saw the Oscar-nominated short films today.
Oh, well done. You've done it again. Well done.
That was pretty good. I'm not saying that there were great films, but one thing that caught me was how a couple of them just seem like actually big budget productions. I think of the short films as being something where you might see a new filmmaker, or learn something about some filmmaker from other countries or whatnot. They were all dominated by, there was a UK film called The After. There was a USA film called Red, White, and Blue. There was a UK-US film that featured Benedict Cumberbatch, Ray Fiennes, Ben Kingsley, and Dev Patel. Do you want to know who the director was?
This was Alexander. No, not Alexander Payne. Who was it?
You're there. You're close.
The other Alexander.
Well, he's more of an Anderson.
That's
Wes Anderson is up
Wes
for
Anderson.
An Oscar for a short film. It just seems, this is a multi-million-dollar, 40-minute short film. Just for me, I thought there was a spirit to the short film category where some young directors with their calling card pictures might get known. But now you've got bigger stars in films that are bigger productions, and they've already got Netflix already all over them as producers. It just seems a little odd. So I did see those. There was a Canadian film as well that I liked very much, and just one Danish film. So they were mostly English language countries. And as I said, it was there were very few of them were short films. The Wes Anderson films, 40 minutes. The 5 films total were 2 hours and 20 minutes or something like that. So they were averaging 30-something minutes of film. So saw Totem, which is a Mexican film. We were down in New York City, so we had access to some more international films in the theater down there, which was interesting. And then I'm not like the TRCC book club guy that you are, but... This is my second episode in a row where I've read a play and then either seen the movie or the play. In this case, I read the play, saw the play, The Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams down in New York City. And then we went back last night. We just started, so we're halfway through. It's a Richard Burton, Ava Gardner, 1964 production, which is actually, I think, the best of the three. I think John Huston rewrote it. It's a better script. And in part, do you want to know why?
Tell me why.
They eliminated the Nazi characters. In the play, there's this group of 4 Nazi characters, German characters, I should say, various Nazi sympathizers anyway. It takes place in the 1930s, so that explains it. In the play version that we saw, they reduced it to 2 because all they do is drink beer and sing songs. It doesn't vilify them well enough, and it's just kind of very stereotypical Germans on vacation in Mexico kind of moment. And in the film, they just decided They're not important at all. They don't serve any purpose, and they just eliminated them entirely. So it was interesting, and I think that's kind of a good connection to this week's pod because, maybe you don't need the Nazis after all.
Yeah, anything that eliminates Nazis immediately gains 2 extra points on my scale. Absolutely. Once again, you have outclassed me. Also playing at this theatre. I always think after we've talked about what's been playing at your theatre that I should go to your theatre.
Come on over. I actually I have 4 within walking distance, there are 4 places that offer some pretty interesting programming, so I'm always in good shape.
We have just time to do the socials.
Oh, yeah.
On Instagram, we are at 2 Real Cinema Club. You can read the blog at 2realcinemaclub.com, comment on the YouTube channel, or email us at 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time, we are watching
Origin,
which is Ava DuVernay. New film based on a book called Cast. Is that right?
That's correct, by Isabel Wilkerson. Yeah, I think it's Origin, not Origins.
Yeah, I looked up the book before we recorded, and the book is 550 pages, something like that. So I will try not to let the 2 Real Book Club down, but I can't guarantee anything. Well, and we will be comparing it with.
Yes. Well, we'll give you a break if you don't read the book. We'll understand because the other film is 3 hours and 15 minutes.
Oof.
We're replacing the Nazis with the Ku Klux Klan, and we're watching The Birth of a Nation. It's a D.W. Griffith film from, what was it, 1915 or 1920. This one's over 100
something
years
like
old.
that. Oh, my God. Nothing but the best people on this podcast. Yeah.
Yes. We'll get it out of our system, and then we're going to move on. We promise.
We promise we'll come back to the 21st century. Thanks for listening, as always. We'll be at the Popcorn Counter next week.
Yeah.
Talking about something related to this week's film. I'm not sure what. And then we will see you next time for Origin and Birth of a Nation.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks and goodbye.
Bye.